Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is John Baldivia. I am the chair of the entertainment law section here at the Beverly Hills Bar. Today, we are going to talk about racial bias in the entertainment industry. The this panel is being graciously co-sponsored and co-hosted by a few partners who I'm going to list right now. There's the John M. Langston Bar Association of Los Angeles, Mexican American Bar Association, Black Women Lawyers Association of Los Angeles, Latina Lawyers Bar Association, the Philippine American Bar Association, and the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Los Angeles. We are very thankful for having them as co-sponsors on such a very important and pertinent topic, especially in today's climate. Just a few announcements before we get into the meat of this program. There's a few upcoming panels that the Entertainment Law Session is going to be covering in the next few weeks. Next week on Wednesday, November 16th, the Beverly Hills Bar Association's Entertainment Law Section will have its annual music law update, where we bring on 3 esteemed panelists to discuss the current state of the music industry and the law that drives everything that we do in our music industry here in the U.S. And then on Monday, November 28th, after the Thanksgiving holiday, we have a panel entitled "Content Providers versus Internet Service Providers: Net Neutrality Principle Challenged by the European Commission." It's going to be a riveting discussion about the EU, the European Commission proposing laws to have content providers fund the infrastructure development in Europe for internet service providers, and discussing how that might impact the bottom line for your clients. So I'm going to introduce our panels, and then I'm going to our panelists before I start my part of the presentation. First and foremost, we have Tope Yusuf, who's the Vice President of Employment Law and Head of Legal Department Diversity at NBCUniversal in New York City. Tope partners with human resources and business leaders for several NBCU business units, including NBC Sports, Ad Sales, Universal Studio Group, and Entertainment. Tope provides day-to-day advice and counsel, as well as insights on strategic goals of the business. She is also responsible for supervising investigations into workplace misconduct and allegations of discriminatory treatment. Tope also is responsible for overseeing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for NBCU's legal department. Prior to joining NBCUniversal, Tope was a partner at Aaron Fox in the labor and employment and government enforcement and white-collar groups. And then we also have Marjorie Garcia joining us, who is a partner at King, Holmes, Paterno, and Soriano. Marjorie has spearheaded the expansion of the Latin music department at her firm. She has successfully nurtured a strong roster within the Latin market that includes a broad range of recording artists, songwriters, producers, and independent labels. Marjorie is a frequent speaker at events due to her expertise in the Latin market, and she's been recognized by Billboard magazine and Variety magazine as a top music lawyer. Prior to joining the firm, Marjorie worked as an attorney in the Business and Legal Affairs Department at Universal Music Latin Entertainment, which is a division of UMG Recordings, Inc., for 6 years, providing support and legal advice to UMLE's legal departments in the territories of US, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, and Spain. Marjorie also provided legal review and analysis of various agreements and content to avoid copyright, trademark, and privacy infringement claims and to mitigate risk. And last but not least, we have Kevin J. Greene, who is a professor of law at Southwestern Law School. Kevin is a nationally recognized entertainment and intellectual property law scholar and an expert witness consultant for copyright, trademark, publicity rights, and entertainment contract disputes. Kevin practiced law in New York at the law firm of Kravitz, Swaine and Moore, where he represented high-profile companies such as Time Warner and HBO in various litigation matters. He later joined New York's top entertainment law boutique firm, where he's represented clients such as film production companies, including director Spike Lee's 40 Acres and a Mule Film Company, iconic music artists, including Harry Connick Jr., Bobby Brown, and Public Enemy. Kevin is also a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. Today is the Marine Corps birthday, as well as a recipient of the California State Bar's highest award, the Vanguard Award for Innovation in the field of IP, academic category. I am John Baldivia. I am a transactional attorney and partner at Rossi PC, primarily focusing on user transactions. and also the moderator for today's panel. So I'm going to start by presenting a slideshow, which is really meant to just lay the foundation for what's going to be discussed today. Give me a second while I get this up and running. Here we are. So,
John, it looks like it's not screen sharing.
how about now? Is that working?
Yep. So it looks like if you could exit out of this, it looks like we're still seeing the next slide prompts. So it's not in full presentation view yet.
Okay. Let's again. How about now?
Beautiful. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. So what I want to make sure that we're focusing on today isn't necessarily discrimination or racism. We're talking about racial bias. What we're really discussing here are associations made by individuals in the unconscious state of mind, where the individual is likely not aware of the bias association, and implicit racial bias can cause individuals to unknowingly act in discriminatory ways. Now, what we're not necessarily suggesting that our industry or people in the industry are being overly racist, but rather that their perceptions have been shaped by experiences, and these perceptions potentially result in biased thoughts or actions. The real purpose of this panel today is to have a conversation about it so that we can start addressing the issue, not necessarily say, one thing or another is the problem or the culprit for anything, but just to engage in dialogue, to see what it is that we're observing and how we can recognize bias within our own industry. There have been recent studies in both the legal profession as well as the entertainment industry on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm just going to share some of the research that was conducted first in the legal profession, which is really meant to show the strides that have been made among the legal community in efforts to make the work community more diverse and more equitable and inclusive. So Acritas Research, which is a Thomson Reuters company, had conducted a survey back in 2016 among 20,000 law firm clients, and they had found that diverse legal teams earn 25% higher share of the wallet, are more than 1.5 times as likely to achieve a perfect 10 score, and generally receive over 3 times higher net promoter scores based on Bain & Company Client Satisfaction Index. In your materials, you're going to have access to all these slides. So if you want to see more about these studies, feel free to dig through the written materials so you can click on the links and get access to them directly. I'm really just sharing the highlights of each of the studies to share what they've found. The Diversity Lab also has done their own initiatives where they've created what's called the Mansfield Rule, which measures whether law firms have affirmatively considered at least 30% women, lawyers of color, LGBTQ+ lawyers, and lawyers with disabilities for leadership in governance roles, equity partner promotions, formal client pitch opportunities, and senior lateral positions. And their research, according to Leopold Solutions research study conducted earlier this year, 300 law firms and 80+ corporate legal departments have achieved the Diversity Lab's Mansfield certification, which requires firms to consider 30% diverse candidates for hiring and 50% corporate diverse candidates for hiring. And the key findings of that research show that 18% of all attorneys in the AM Law 200 law firms are ethnically diverse, which is up a full percentage point from the previous 3 years. 23% of lateral hires into AM Law 200 firms were ethnically diverse. 63 of those law firms gained a small number of ethnically diverse attorneys, small being 1 to 10 hires. 94 firms experienced small gains for gender diversity among attorneys, again, about 1 to 10 hires. and 54 of those firms experienced losses for gender diverse attorneys at their firm, I should say firm. Non-diverse men in the top 200 left and returned the top 200 firms at a lower rate than ethnically diverse attorneys at just 29%. So what this is really showing is that while there have been some progress made within the legal profession, it does look like there is still room to grow, and we'll talk more about it on this panel to see where there might be room for growth here. When we look at research that was conducted in the entertainment industry specifically, UCLA had done a survey in 2021 and published a report earlier this year, which shows its findings within the film and television community. Just as a foundation, in 2021, 42% of the U.S. population were people of color. When we compare that to film demographics in 2021, 38.9% of lead actors in film were people of color. 30.2% of directors were people of color. 32.3% of writers were people of color. If we then look at TV demographics in 2021 and focus on show creators, we see that 13.1% of show creators in broadcast scripted shows were people of color. 26.6% of show creators in cable scripted shows were people of color, and 25.6% of show creators in digital scripted shows were people of color, which is far below the 42% national average. Looking at the leading roles, we see that 27.3% of leads in broadcasted scripted shows were people of color, 39.6 and 37.6 for cable scripted shows and digital scripted shows, respectively. And with regard to show creators, we have 30.3% of credited writers in broadcasted scripted shows being people of color, and then 37.7 and 32.5 with respect to cable scripted. And I'm sorry, that's a typo on the last one. That was digital scripted should be the last one. 32.5% for digital scripted shows were people of color. If we turn to the music industry, there was a survey conducted by USC, which was looking at the same kind of statistics. This study, which was sponsored by Universal Music Group, had shown the results by examining diversity in 3 different ways. They examined diversity among CEOs and presidents across 70 major and independent companies. They were looking across senior management teams at the 9 major music companies and looking at executive roles across 119 companies from the VP level and above in 6 industry categories. And what their studies had shown were that if we start first with the CEO positions across the 70 major and independent music companies, only 13.9% of top executives were from underrepresented racial ethnic groups. 4.2% of them were Black and 13.9% of them were women. Looking across senior management teams at 9 major music companies, just based on the website profiles, we see that 18.8% of the executive board members were from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. 8.5% of them were Black, and 30.7% of them were women. And then finally, for the 4,000 executives that were surveyed at 119 different major and independent companies, we see that 19.8% of executives at the VP level and above were underrepresented, 7.5% of which were Black, and 35.3% were women. So, this really is meant to show that there's room for growth and discussion with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion, in particular within our legal community and within the entertainment industry. So I'm going to first kick off this discussion. And by the way, I want to let everyone know that we do have the Q&A box open, and we will be addressing these towards the last 15 minutes of the program. So feel free to include your questions there as we're going along. We'll try to get to the end. But to start off the discussion, we want to take a look at what racial bias looks like in the workplace currently, particularly in our industry. And I'm going to present this first question to Marjorie and Tope. Are employers creating a culturally hostile environment by not accommodating for diverse backgrounds? And we see the statistics that were shown in the first 10, 15 minutes of this program. And we want to start talking about why this is the case. So is there something wrong culturally within our work environments that's creating these numbers?
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you, John, and apologies to everyone for my voice. I don't know, it disappeared in the last 24 hours or so. Thank you, John, and to the Beverly Hills Bar Association. I'm thrilled to be part of this today, as well as the co-sponsors. Your question is an interesting one. I'm looking at it from the lens, both of my role as the head of DEI for the legal function at NBC, but also as an employment lawyer, right? Part of what I see and in my experience prior to joining here. I think it's been challenging, and the last 2 years or 2.5 years are probably different than what it looked like previously in terms of what employers are doing. We're seeing more, or at least I'm seeing more opportunities for employees to voice what it would look like for an inclusive work environment. And what's been heartening, frankly, is seeing employers respond, whether it's through ERGs, employee resource groups, that provide those opportunities for like-minded folks to come together. So not just those that identify, but the allies as well, sponsoring programs, having talks, having opportunities for conversations. I think I've seen several organizations call them courageous conversations or some sort of talks and sessions for really open dialogue and more of a free exchange than what I've seen in the past. I'm not sure where that trend is heading, particularly right now where we're seeing more impacts of the workforce where there are talks of a recession and you're seeing larger scale layoffs. I think some folks are waiting to see, are employers going to be over-indexing, under-indexing when they look at the impacts at their workforce that these layoffs are having? And will employees feel like they were cared for throughout this process? And is there still a desire to maintain a culturally sensitive environment? So I think we're in a space where it's a mixed answer, where I don't think employers are necessarily creating a culturally hostile environment. Quite to the contrary, I think they're opening it up more. But I wonder if now, with the change or perceived upcoming change in economic circumstances, if this will be one of the first things to go. Will the funding remain for these programs, or will they fall by the wayside and be less? But I'm really interested in hearing Marjorie's thoughts on this as well.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation, John, and to the Beverly Hills Bar Association. And I think I do want to recognize that this is an uncomfortable, conversation, and it's going to make people feel uncomfortable because I think we as a society don't want to believe that we have these implicit biases that are formed by the communities that we interact with and our experiences, how we grew up, our class and our positions in life. But I think it's an important one, and especially in a legal profession where it's based on fairness, and whether we as employers and employees feel that where we're employed is a fair place. I think and I know that we're going to go through a lot of these things through this panel, but we start to look, and it's important to look at, what are your implicit biases? Are you hiring people outside of your peripheral view, and not just in your circle, but are making an effort to actually reach out to organizations that you might not normally reach out to? And I think that is particular to entertainment, because a lot of people in entertainment will say to you, well, it's who you know. But if you don't know anybody, in the way that, the way that I felt when I was going into this, there was nobody that I could look at and say, oh my God, look at this Latina woman that has reached this type of position at a law firm as a partner. And I think as an employee, I have felt historically underrepresented, undersupported, and I, but now as somebody who's in a position of power as a partner at this firm, and having found the firm that is supportive of me and what I feel is important to grow our firm, that made all the difference, because my firm does believe in diversity, and they do believe in going out into spaces that are not normally thought out, and looking beyond the resume and say, it is not just important to have somebody at this firm who has reached a certain GPA. It's also important to have somebody who is culturally sensitive, because we don't just represent white men. We represent people of color. And those people more and more are looking to us to say, how do you know what my experience is as a Black artist or a Latino artist? So I think having found a firm that says, what is important to you, Marjorie? What would you like to create? And as John mentioned, that's what we did. We created a division of a firm to say, we want to address the concerns of the Latino music population. And I'm really, really incredibly proud of that. And I think we do have to, but it is a work. It is the work that needs to be done, Tope. And I'm so glad to hear that there's all these initiatives in these corporate structures, because that's what needs to happen. And it needs to happen a lot and often.
Thank you for both of those answers, and I do tend to agree that we as an industry really are making a concerted effort to start these initiatives. But I want to turn to another question that even if we're making strides in terms of hiring, these studies that I just presented, these are studies that were conducted within the past year or two. Is there an issue with respect to not necessarily hiring, but retaining people of color within the companies so that they can later progress to reach these leadership positions?
Yeah, I can chime in on that one, John. I do think retention is one of those areas that when I was a partner at a law firm, I think there was sometimes loss. You were just so focused on bringing the people in, you forgot that you had to keep them there. So you couldn't replace the seats as fast as they were leaving, even though your numbers you were bringing in were pretty high. One thing I can comment on is what we're doing in terms of our legal function. We have several programs we have that are really focused on making people feel included, which studies that I've read indicate that that's what makes people stay, right? It's feeling like you belong where you are. Of course, having a path and a future, all of that is also important, but feeling like you're in a space where you belong. So one of the things we started, our diversity committee for the legal function now does this program where you pair folks who come into the legal function with someone who already works here, that's worked here for about a year or more, that then their job is to have a few in-person meetings with you, really build that relationship, and also introduce you to 2 or 3 people that you wouldn't otherwise meet, right? So really creating a culture for you, making sure you understand that you belong and you have people that are there. We focus on the retention piece, but we also think it starts early. So looking at the pipeline piece, some of the things that we do are mentoring circles, right? Especially during the pandemic, when there were the early stages of the pandemic, I should say. I don't know that the WHO has actually made a decision. We're no longer in the pandemic, but certainly we had these virtual mentoring circles. So no one's going to those large events for the who you know. To Marjorie's point, you can't meet people. So we would host these programs, 5 to 6 people in a Zoom room, right? Just having a chat so you can get to know people and then staying in touch with them, putting them on our list so that when a job opportunity came up, they had previously expressed interest in a particular space, we'd make sure they got that and then they could apply. And lo and behold, they already know people here because they attended our event. So really making sure that people feel like they belong, I think is part of the retention. And then being very loud about what you're doing. I do think that employers that are doing the right thing should be pumping themselves up, should make sure it's permeating the environment. I don't remember who said it or what I heard, but diversity shouldn't be just a room in the house. It should be part of the foundation, right? That concept that it's everywhere as opposed to just a little part of it. And I think that really drives that retention, and it's what gets people to stay, is not feeling othered, like I'm going to my diversity meeting or my Black lawyers meeting. Those spaces should exist, but you should also feel like it's talked about at the highest levels and all the time, how important it is.
And if I could also chime in one thing, I mean, I think that the retention piece is so important because it starts with those sort of like microaggression or the implicit bias or just the unconscious bias that some people might have, where they assume or presume that somebody of color does not have the same amount of talent or cannot take on certain types of work. And so if you unconsciously do that, then you really start to put that person in a zone where they're not on track to become partners at law firms. And so it's not surprising that people of color amount to, I think, 10% of all partners at law firms. So that's not surprising if you're not creating resources and creating opportunities for people to continue to grow and to feel safe. Because I think also I was reading how that leads to stress and other sort of mental health issues when you're not being supportive of people of color in the workspace. So it halts them from also advancing. And so it's that effect is going to last throughout the entirety of that person's career. So it is important to have programs like this where they feel really supported.
I want to piggyback off of that comment real quick. You said something about how it's perceived, or people may perceive the white male to be more competent as an attorney or as a company leader. And I'm going to open this question up to all of you. Do you think that this bias towards the white male figure, is that something that seems to be perpetuated within the workplace or within the clientele, or both?
I want to give KJ an opportunity to speak, but I will say that, I mean, I've had personal experiences where I've walked in a suit into law firms when I was litigating, where I was immediately perceived as the translator or the person that was there to take notes, but not somebody who was there to do the actual deposition. And I think those sort of assumptions, do I think that the person that said that to me as I was walking in was trying to overtly be racist? No. But I think that the perception was that they've not seen somebody of color be in that position, so that they are not used to assuming that that person is a person who is there to take a deposition. So I do think that, I mean, I have personally experienced that. I've spoken English to somebody, English with, I don't have an accent, but I've spoken English to somebody and had somebody ask me to speak English to them. And I said, I am speaking English. I mean, I've had just these crazy experiences where people's bias are just so inherent that they just make these assumptions, and so I'm sure KJ or Tobe have had similar experiences where there's just this perception that we're not, they're in a position of power. And it's really unfortunate.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I would just say, first of all, thanks, John and Beverly Hills Bar Association for putting this together. It's really important, a thing that you're doing. So, and I really appreciate that. I also want to give a shout out to any veterans who are on the Zoom call, and it's Veterans Day. It's also the Marine Corps birthday. So thanks for that. And thanks for your service. And also just want to say I'm honored to be on this panel with Tope and Marjorie as well. So first of all, I don't think this is about blaming white men. It's funny because as people of color, and I'm going to specifically say as Black people, we speak differently in a room when we're all together than when we're in a room with other people in it, right? We say different things. And I think that's part of the gap right here that needs to be bridged. When I see those numbers that you flashed on the screen, first of all, when I looked at the movie numbers, I said, who are all these people of color working in the movie industry? I certainly don't see them, right? And as for the music industry, it's truly disgraceful, right? Because the American music industry is built on Black creativity. And so, and in the beginning and today. And so for those numbers to be so low represents a serious problem. And as for the law firms, yes, I guess you could say some progress has been made, but the ABA's own stats show that the law is the least diverse of all the professions. That means we're less diverse than accounting, and that's kind of hard to do in it. So on the one hand, we want to encourage people to move forward. On the other hand, I don't think anybody should be patting themselves on the back about this for it. But this to me is the panel is entitled bias. I don't even see it as bias. I see it as institutional racism, which is kind of baked into the cake. And until we address that as a people, then we won't be able to move forward very much. We have to acknowledge that, for example, the entertainment industry played a crucial role in promulgating all kinds of horrible stereotypes about all kinds of different groups. And this went on until the 1970s and 1980s. Same thing with the music industry, which has a rather dark and shameful history of exploitation of African-American artists in particular. So one of the things I'm looking for, and yes, I do have an agenda, because we all do, is I want to see the entertainment industry collectively make an apology for that. I think that'll go a long way towards recognition that it's always been this way. It's nothing new. Even though we're in California and everybody in LA thinks that they're woke or they're liberal or whatever, that's not historically what's happened. The other thing I'd say about that is that the other numbers you show that actually diversity and inclusion is actually good for business. Every study shows that the more diverse casting, the more the movies and TV shows that have diverse casting do better at the box office or in streaming. And so I think that's the conversation that needs to be had, because I don't know if we're going to persuade people who are truly biased to change. And I have no desire to do that, quite honestly. But maybe we can show, and I'm speaking particularly here to my white friends, that actually, if you are get to the root of racism, and I'm particularly concerned about anti-Black racism, it's going to help everybody in this industry. It's going to help people at the executive level. It's going to help people at the creative level. And so I think that's the conversation I really want to have about this, because changing people's minds and changing their biases, I'm not too confident that that can happen. And in fact, every study shows, unfortunately, that diversity training does not work. And one big reason is the study also shows that these white male partners and bigwigs, they really resent doing this work, and they feel it's taking away from their bottom line. And until we change that, the numbers are going to be stagnant.
It's so great you say that, Kevin, because, I think and I do think that it requires vision, and it does, speaking numbers to people works, because back when, even before Despacito was a major hit, I was at Universal and I saw it. I saw the climb and I saw the income going up, and I saw the trend coming where it wasn't going to be a trend anymore, where Latino music, Spanish music was going to become mainstream music. And we saw it, and we saw the vision, and going into this firm, they believed it too. And so it required someone to say, this is economically, having a lawyer who is going to having lawyer and staff and secretaries and paralegals and everyone that could service a community that only speaks Spanish, and that culturally you can connect with. Having that contributes to our bottom line. It contributes to money. So if there's no other reason, make money. Include people into your firm that are going to make you money, because they're going to reach another population that you otherwise could not reach. There's nobody that, if I sit across from an immigrant family, like my immigrant parents that look like me, and I read through a 60-page recording agreement with them, and I translate it in Spanish, I'm going to get that job because I can connect with them, and that equals money to the firm. So it's so great that you said that, because it really is short-sighted for firms to not see that diversity also equals income.
Absolutely. All the studies show, and John, I think one of your slides indicated that these teams that are truly inclusive are far more productive, far more innovative, and do better for the bottom line. Somehow that message hasn't been translated, because I know these companies like to make money, right? Right, they're in the business of making money at the end of the day, and so kind of bridging that gap between the reality of what diverse teams are, right? You know, oh, we're not just a bunch of affirmative action babies, right? Who somehow got here because we didn't know what we were doing. If you understand how affirmative action works, that's not even how it works, right? That you're dealing with people who are the cream of the crop generally, right? And you know, people like Tope, right? You know, who are just extraordinary people. And I say, why wouldn't you want to bring more people like that into your team?
Right, right. All right, so those are all wonderful comments, and I want to shift this discussion a little bit. Tope, you had talked about diversity not being just a room in the house, but being part of the foundation. And so, Marjorie, when we had met about this, preparing for this panel, you had brought up something that I want to address here, and I want to point this question to you, but anyone who has thoughts on this, I want you guys to chime in as well. How difficult is it for people of color to become entertainment attorneys, or attorneys in general? I know when we spoke last, you had mentioned how you coming from a first generation, you know, being a first generation immigrant, or your parents, I can't remember which one it was. It just wasn't economically as easy for you to take the LSAT or go to law school. And so, you know, if we're talking about the foundations of just becoming a member of the legal profession in general, what are your thoughts on how difficult it's been just for people of color to get into this profession to begin with?
It's extremely difficult because economically, you know, my parents, my mom was a housekeeper, and my dad worked in a restaurant, and so I had to put myself through college. So I had to work 4 jobs as I'm, you know, going to my last year, doing my final papers, and having to study for the LSAT. And I think that it did affect my score. It affected my ability to focus. And even financially, it's like I'm still trying. I'm trying to keep afloat, you know, and paying my bills and putting myself through college. That it really there were moments when I really thought to myself, and I'm sure that you know, and I hear it from people who want to go law school or in law school, the financial commitment can be the reason why you don't do it, because you're so terrified of what that means. You know, you're terrified that you may not get the big firm job. I mean, you may not, you know, have the ability to pay off these loans. And so it's really tough. And I think one of the things, if I could have any recommendation to law firms, is start there. Start with, you know, could you pay for, you know, 30 people for their LSAT exams? Could you pay for the bar? The bar is incredibly expensive. And if you're not in a position, I mean, even some of the, you know, entertainment jobs are historically, especially in-house counsel jobs, are historically very low paying. So only people who have parents who can fund their, you know, the rest of their bills and the rent can afford to take those jobs. And so I think it starts there, where you start sort of people start to psych themselves out from even being able to go down the path of becoming a lawyer. And I was so grateful that somebody in that time period said to me, just do it, take the loan, do it all, take as much as you can, and you'll figure it out later. But having, you know, not having that as being a barrier could really help a lot of Latino students.
Yeah, it's such a good point that you make, Marjorie. Honestly, when I think about pipeline programs, sometimes folks don't see the value. They say, oh, once they've graduated, you know, we'll look at the first or second year or the junior lawyers, but it starts before then. And as we've done more work and with our outside counsel to better understand their diversity initiatives and what they're doing. So say, we want you to model the behavior that we say that we value and have our values, the shared values are really important to us. I think one thing we've learned is there are firms who are reaching back to high school, right? They're going pre-law, pre-college, like they're really starting early. And some of them are just as simple as letting you know there are lots of different ways to work in the legal profession. Here's what this lawyer does versus that lawyer. Here's our director of operations. Here's our senior paralegal, you know, those kinds of programs. And then some of them are focused on college students, right? One of our firms sponsors college students to come to their firm and learn about what that opportunity looks like, right? With the goal being, let's encourage these college students to become lawyers. Let's give them one of them a job or a couple of them a job through whatever scholarship program. So I do think that there are many law firms, at least that either I've partnered with or the firm I worked with prior, that are focused on giving financial boosts to underrepresented populations or underrepresented individuals. I think the challenge some of them are facing is that, frankly, it's a generalization that rings true often, but isn't always the case, that the person who is part of the underrepresented population also is economically disadvantaged. So you find yourself giving the $15,000 or $30,000 diversity scholarship to the person who got a free ride to their law school. And you're going, am I really helping the people I'm meant to help here? So perhaps there should be some additional attention paid to economic diversity to try to gauge how can we help in broader ways than just looking at racial or gender diversity.
I think that's very important, and what Marjorie, you were saying, it resonated with me. I was a kid from Jamaica, Queens. My father drove the Queens Boulevard bus, and suddenly I find myself in law school at Yale. And then I find myself at a big law firm, and I didn't know anything. I knew nothing, right? Literally. And there are a lot of people like me, is what I'm going to say, is what I want to say. There's a lot of people like me who are out there. I got into this profession because in high school, we had a man come and speak about his experiences in the legal profession. He was a white man. And that was how I got inspired to go to law school. But I agree that we need more people, right? We need numbers, right? Coming in. And right now we don't have that. And the other part is what John was talking about. We have to make the people feel welcome. And this is a cultural issue, I think more so than even a racial issue, right? But I don't want to speak for Black people, but I will, I guess, for the purpose of this call. We're a warm culture. We're a culture where we don't walk by each other without, brothers won't walk by each other without doing this. We might not even look in his eye, and sometimes when you come into white culture, it can seem very cold. It can seem very unwelcoming, right? And I'm not saying intentionally or not. And I think all firms and people who are on this call, you have to think about that, right? Who is coming in? And those little things make a big difference about whether you're going to retain people or not, believe it or not, right? Are you cordial? Are you, checking in and seeing how people are doing? Are you recognizing that as a minority lawyer, they may have additional burdens that you don't have, right? So that's an issue that folks have to think about. And the retention rate is not great either, by the way, for once attorneys do come into these spaces. And that's something people have to think long and hard about. One thing I just want to say more is that it's a different generation. My generation was, we'll cut off our arm to get into a big corporate law firm or an entertainment company. And then I look at my students now, and particularly my sisters, and they're like, well, we want to wear our hair a certain way. And I'm like, wow, you guys are so differently. My approach was, I'll cut off my hair, right? If that's what it takes to get the job. But I respect that. And I respect them saying, no, we want to also retain our own culture, our own individuality, even in these spaces. And so for entities and firms that want to keep people like that, they're going to have to be sensitive to those issues.
Thank you. Now, since we're talking about culture, and this may or may not actually be pointed towards bias, but rather an internal cultural thing. I know that for me growing up, I didn't know any other Filipinos that were attorneys. None of my friends became attorneys who were Filipino. And so I never had role models for myself to look up to and say, hey, there's a Filipino attorney that I eventually want to become. Do minority cultures in the US need more role models where they can point to and say, hey, we as a minority community need more lawyers to look up to, or is that really not part of the issue?
I mean, they go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, I was going to say that's an interesting one, because I don't know that it's so much that there aren't enough lawyers. I think it's different types of lawyers doing different types of things that people need more exposure to. I think about it, and I think there are certain segments that I'm seeing where there is more representation than others. So I see a lot of employment lawyers that are people of color, but I don't see as many M&A lawyers, right? So maybe there are different spaces, and getting a sense of where does it exist? Where is that opportunity? And then as much as possible, trying to diversify. It's hard enough when it's only 4.2%, I think is what you showed in terms of Black representation, I think, at the partner level, and maybe it's lawyers generally, to then be able to say, how can we spread it along? I remember back when I was in law school and we're looking at what firms do you go to for your summer. And a lot of folks are looking at which firms have the most people that look like me. And so that means 3 firms are going to win and the others are going to lose because nobody's going. Like if they don't look like me, then I don't want to be there. Well, if you're not there, we won't get people that look like you. So it becomes this challenge for firms. And then in certain instances is, okay, we do have a large population, large relative. Why don't we spread out? Instead of having everybody join this practice group, why don't we teach them about others? So I think a lot of that is on whatever education that folks that are currently practicing can give to those that are entering the industry to say, hey, you're interested in becoming an entertainment lawyer. Let me tell you what that means, right? It can mean a lot of different things. I'm an employment lawyer who is at a media and entertainment company. So you can be a lawyer who does certain things, and at that company, what kind of work specifically do you want to do? Is it an industry, or is it that you want to do specific kind of work? And getting a better sense of what different practice areas exist, what different opportunities there are. I think that will be what's more helpful. So I don't know necessarily that we need more role models. I think we need diversification in terms of the education folks are getting about the opportunities that are available.
I'd say we also, I struggled for a while to decide whether I was comfortable being on panels and throwing my name into the hat of the Billboard top lawyers and the variety, because culturally, my culture says you don't do that. You don't talk about yourself. You don't boast yourself. You don't do these things. And so I really struggled with it for a while. And I remember someone saying to me that we had a responsibility to do these things, because if the younger generation doesn't see us, they don't think they can be us, and so that representation matters, that we sort of, we allow ourselves to be visible as well, and that we do the panels, and that the firms also support us and say, okay, I want you to go and talk about your work. I want you to go and be on those lists. Because even when you look at those lists, I look through them and I notice what they look like and what they predominantly consist of. And I think, I think in time that's going to change, but I put myself out there to allow younger Latinas to call me and sit with me and have coffee and talk about the journey, because I think it's very similar for a lot of Latinas in this industry, of how they feel their own sort of sense of non-worthy, because you like, how did I get here? Oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And the fear and the imposter syndrome and all that. You need a space where you can talk about those things. And I do feel like that for myself is my responsibility to contribute for the next generation of Latina lawyers.
That's really amazing. That's amazing. I mean, I say, John, the answer is yes. Yes, I mean, in all sectors. I mean, in the academic sector, it's horrible, the underrepresentation, right? I am the only African-American male at my law school right now, and that's pretty consistent across, if you look at Los Angeles law schools and all over the country. And so I think it's important for people from different backgrounds to see. I know a lot of my students, they've never had a Black professor before, right? That's white students and Black students. So we're not only role models within our communities, we're role models outside our communities. I think another conversation to have maybe another time, and maybe that's a private conversation, but within the African-American community, at some point, there does have to be some discussion about this, because, the old school of our community was uplift the race, right? W.E.B. Du Bois, right? We were, each of us as a Black person had an opportunity to do all we could to show that, our talents and the like. And, right now, a lot of our role models maybe aren't the most positive people, particularly for our youth and for our children. And I think that, and I know I probably sound like a conservative saying this, right? I'm not, but I think that's a conversation that also has to be heard. So why aren't we seeing more people like Marjorie and like Tope, right? That's not what's portrayed in the media, right? There's so much success in our own communities. but that's not what gets out there. What gets out there is, somebody acting like a thug or, doing something ridiculous. So yes, role models, yes, but the right ones, I would say.
Okay. And a little bit more about just institutional biases and things that are kind of rooted in our industry. So Kevin, you had done an incredible report entitled Thieves in the Temple, the Scandal of Copyright Registration and African-American Artists, and how the copyright registration process in the US has been just procedurally skewed against African-American creatives. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what you found in your research?
Sure. Well, for over 20 years, I've been writing about, and I was the first person to do so, and analyzing the impact of IP, particularly copyright, but also trademark and publicity rights on the Black community. And to me, this is very important work because I don't think you could find much agreement that in terms of creativity, the African-American community is, and musically especially, all the innovation in music and all the creativity in music has come from Black artists. And so I was in Thailand, actually at the World IP Forum. They gave me this little thing while I was there. And I'm sitting there in a cafe in Thailand, in Bangkok, and this Thai guy comes over to two British guys who were at the bar and says, "Where can I find some blues music around here?" So our music and our cultural impact hasn't just been the United States, it's been global. But the problem, as I've written about, is there's a major disconnect between the contributions of those artists and what they've received from the industry, and indeed, as you indicated, their positions in the industry. Ron Sweeney is a colleague of mine. He's a great lawyer, and he said at one of the panels we were on, he said there's only one or two Black people in the entire music industry who have any power, right? And this is just last year, so we're not talking about ancient history. But looking at the structure of copyright law and the registration system, it's very clear that, and all the formalities, not just registration, publication, notice, all the things, particularly under the old 1909 Act, were literally killing these Black artists who, whether they were from the blues artists from the Delta and Mississippi, or the Chicago people, or all the way to Harlem. They simply didn't have the wherewithal, the resources to know and navigate this formalistic system. And there are still overtones of that today, because as you know, John, registration is required to institute an action. And I get calls from all kinds of artists. I don't know how they find me, but it's almost a daily thing. A visual artist, music artist. And they're like, "Oh, somebody took my stuff." And I'm like, the first question that anybody on this call is going to ask is like, "Do you have a registration?" That's going to be the first question you ask. And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And that's particularly true in the Black community. And so right off the bat, you're behind the 8 ball and may not even have a case simply because of that. So that's why I looked at registration. And of course, I've also in that article talked about historically how registration fraud has been the bane of African-American artists, other people registering copyrights, false claims of joint authorship, like with Elvis, who required Otis Blackwell to sign off that they were joint authors and Elvis never wrote anything. And this goes all the way today to Lil Wayne, who, when he sued Birdman and Cash Money, after he didn't get the $10 million, it took him 2 years to figure that out, by the way, that he was due $10 million. Whoa. It turned out that it was a joint venture and the copyrights were supposed to be registered Cash Money, Young Money, Lil Wayne, and Birdman. And of course, they were just registered for Cash Money. And why is that? Because the Copyright Office has no mechanism to deter this. Actually, on the copyright registration form, it doesn't even say, "Hey, if you falsely say that you're the copyright owner, there's going to be a penalty." And indeed, the penalty is the princely sum of $2,500 if you get caught. Well, do the math, right? If you're a nefarious person, sure, you'll pay if you can make $1 million off of somebody's copyright, sure, you'll pay the $2,500. So the article gets into all of those issues.
Okay. Now speaking a little bit on that, having practiced copyright law litigation for a brief period, from my understanding, there is a way to revoke registrations based on evidence of fraud, and I think it has to be.
Good luck with that. Good luck with that. First of all, if it's happening to you, the only way you could get into federal court would be through a declaratory judgment action. And most of the artists that we're talking about, they don't have, Marjorie, you know this, they don't have anywhere near the money to even think about filing an action against anybody. So I often talk about, in that situation where you're talking about, John, it's a right without any remedy. And you might remember that Justice Marshall, the great Justice Marshall, the first one, said, you can't have a right without a remedy. We all learned that in common law. That was one of the first things we learned. And that's exactly what the copyright system is. So if you were well-resourced, sure, you could fight against it, but there's no official mechanism within the Copyright Office or the copyright system to challenge or deter these false copyright registrations. And that is why I have made the radical suggestions that for African-American artists from all the works that are still under copyright, which is anything after 1927, we deserve an audit of those records to determine that the people on those copyright certificates are really the owners. And I guarantee you, that would be such an ugly rock that so many snakes and bugs would call on it, you wouldn't believe it. But the Copyright Office supposedly represents everybody, right? Not just Disney, Warner Brothers, my own company, and others, right? Sorry, I have now concluded my opening statement.
And for those who want to read this article, it is part of the written materials, so it's certainly included. You have access to it, and it's a fascinating read.
Thank you, John.
I want to turn to law firm practice and the way in which that they represent their clients. And this question is an open question for anyone who wants to share their thoughts on this. Are firms resistant to providing diverse legal teams for their clients, even in instances where a client is particularly asking to have someone represent them who is of the same skin color as they are? Are firms responding to this? Do they make any concerted effort to accommodate these, or is it more just a resistance to train people of color or hire people of color to meet those needs?
That's a good question. I'll start and just say that what we've been doing in trying to hold our outside counsel accountable has actually shown that when the client is asking, or at least for us, when we're asking, our firms are responding appropriately. So we started this process of meeting with our firms to discuss, as I said, do we have shared values? Tell us. So show us the data, both the data of what your teams look like generally. So who's at your firm, which you can pull from various sources, ABA, through NALP. There are lots of different places that exist, but we say, tell us this is what it is. And now can we do a deep dive into who you've been staffing on our teams so we can better understand what it looks like. So we're about to launch our third year of having these meetings. And we definitely saw from year 1 to year 2, a level of both seriousness in terms of the response of these firms. So year 1, I think people were like, sure, you're asking, so we'll answer, but like, this can't be real. And there was a difference in the way people presented from year 1 to year 2. And in fact, for a few of the firms, we saw an uptick, an increase where the teams were more diverse than the firm itself was. So they were over-indexing with diverse attorneys. And then they're also sharing with us, here are our plans. Here are the ways that we are looking to continue to improve. We asked them, what are your 3 DEI priorities for next year? Well, and you better believe that come next year, we're going to ask you, how's it gone? What have you done? What's going on? So I think it depends on the level of accountability that they're being held to. I do think firms can be responsive, at least that's been my experience. But I think that if a client is just mentioning it in passing, you're less likely to have certainty that the firm will take it seriously. I mean, when I was at a firm, there were certain partners who said clients don't care about diversity. They care about getting the best lawyer to do the work. And yet, time after time in RFPs, you would see a question: how do you plan to staff this diversely, right? What does your firm do in terms of diversity? So I do believe that firms are responsive to clients, but I also think that clients have to be able to do something more than just a passing request and really start to hold them accountable.
I always joked that when I joined the entertainment firm in New York City, the boutique, that I was put on cases involving Spike Lee and Public Enemy, and I'm pretty sure I probably got my job because of Spike, who has done a lot of great stuff, by the way. When he does his movies, he always leads the way with diverse casting, diverse people behind the scenes, etc. So I think that can make a difference. And I think that, you know, on the artistic side, we have to also be accountable. So a lot of times, and everybody knows this, and yes, I'm going to say it, a lot of these top Black talent, they want a white lawyer, you know, and that I'm sad to have to say that in 2022, but they also, you know, because racism is a disease, it affects everybody. It affects us as people of color, it affects white people, right? That's why we need to stamp it out, right? So we see manifestations of that even today.
Okay. So recently, as you may well know, our community, actually, our you know, globally, we've had to deal with recent waves of overt racism within, especially even within our entertainment industry. Even if we point as recently back to last year, where we were making a concerted effort not to do business with people who were Russian, or you know, now this recent wave of anti-Semitism, you know, that are being perpetuated by a few people who, I think, as an industry, we've all kind of said that, you know, anti-Semitism really isn't something that we're okay with. But as an industry, the entertainment industry in particular, are we doing enough to respond to these kind of movements, these kind of, you know, biases against certain races or demographics when they do arise?
I think it's well, I was just gonna say, Kate, I mean, I'd love to hear one.
No, go ahead.
I think it's similar to, you know, after George Floyd, you know, people were fired up and angry and wanting to do everything that they can do, but it really is like, it is work. It is work that starts before the wave of issue hits everybody in the face, you know. And if you're prepared to meet those issues with an organization of people who care and who don't tolerate things like anti-Semitism, you're prepared to answer, and you're prepared to act against it. And I think some of it is also having ethics in your firm and saying, I will not tolerate clients that say things like this. And there's not enough money in this world that can keep me representing somebody who does not meet the ethics of my staff, my attorneys, my, you know, and that's important. And that's why, you know, I say that I'm grateful that I ended up in a place where they share my beliefs, they share the things that are important to me, because it would not be tolerated at my firm. And I think that, but that starts not when the problem arises. The problem's there, it's been there. Those issues have been there. And I think it just now it becomes a hot button issue, but it exists. It exists, and it is a problem. And to go back to what Kevin said, it's a systematic problem. It's a problem that has existed in the structure.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Well,
I know it's a
kind
of a tough job.
I would just say this. I've always been less concerned about overt acts. First of all, it identifies the person, and so we know they are. I'm much more concerned about the covert stuff. And of course, we need to call out people like you, Kanye, right, who stirred up all this horrible wave of anti-Semitism and, you know, pitting Black people against Jewish people. It's absurd, you know. And also his anti-Black comments were also absurd, and he should have been terminated then. You know, he was basically discriminating against his own people. I think what we see though is really it's much more subtle the way this happens now. And this is what Marjorie was just saying, it's embedded in the structure. So even people unintentionally might not think so, but seeing the lawyer of color, or, you know, the woman in many instances, they might have just a lower opinion right off the bat. We have to guard against that. By the way, we all have to do it. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to a Halloween thing. It was at the faculty, and one of the faculty members had on a medical garb. a woman, and I said, oh, a nurse. And then as soon as I said it, was like, oh, you know, but that's what implicit bias looks like, right? I wasn't trying to be, you know, discriminatory on the gender basis, but that's baked into our cake, right, in our society. So we have to be on guard against it. But I quite honestly don't think it's these overt racists that are the problem. It's the ones who are covert. And I think there's a lot of fear, as Marjorie, I think Tope said in the beginning, these conversations are tough to have for white people, not for us. As Black people, we have these conversations every day. Right?
We live them.
Yes, and we're, you know, this is not uncomfortable. So we're really trying to negotiate this turf where we could come together, have a conversation, make something happen, not scare people off or shut them down. And to me, that's what the dance is right now, right?
I would just add that while definitely I agree that the implicit stuff is difficult and challenging, I think also the explicit can be challenging to address, because yes, you've identified them, but now you have to think about your bottom line. It took a lot of courage for some of those companies to say, okay, we're going to dump billions of dollars or millions of dollars by ending these relationships, because I think that they are answering to shareholders potentially, or to other individuals who are focused on the economics of it. I think they made the right call. I think it was, in my view, an easy call, but I also understand that's not always the case, right? So firms also have to think about who they're representing and whether or not it makes sense and aligns with their views. And if they decide to drop a client, what does that mean, right? Will your employees feel great when you now have to lay off 10% of your workforce because you've decided that you're not going to use that, you know, you're not going to represent that client? Maybe they will. They'll be like, yeah, I'd rather lose my job because I was going to quit anyway if I knew I had to work for this client, but you don't know. So I think there are a lot of complex thoughts that go into these discussions. And while it can be challenging as an employee in any of those instances to feel like your employer did the right thing, I think it is just, there are many considerations in those instances.
Yes, money.
Money. Well, there's also there are rules, right, about withdrawing and, you know, whether you're in litigation or not. So those are considerations. Those are real considerations, but not enough money in the world for me to.
No. So on that vein, John, here, can I do a quick hypo? I just want to see how people respond. So this is a real life situation. I'm not going to call out names, right? Because I'm going to be nice today.
Do it.
This is a top level artist in Hollywood who has done a work. I shouldn't say what kind of work it is, but the work that they did is a complete ripoff of something from Black culture, probably something, maybe, I'm not going to say yes, no, that's in the public domain, but it's still just a complete ripoff and it's a complete copy of it. As the lawyer on the case, would you tell that client, like, wow, man, this looks bad, you know? This has been going on forever where our stuff gets ripped off and nobody gets compensated and nobody gets credited either, right? It's happening still on TikTok. You know, TikTok is fueled by little black girls, little black teenagers doing these dances. They're making a fortune, right? And a lot of times these kids don't even get credited. I heard TikTok is changing that now. So would you say anything to that client? It's like, man, legally, maybe you can do this, but do you want to do this? Are those conversations had?
I think that's why culture in firms is so important, because I can have those conversations with my clients. I can say to them that I can have conversations that exist outside of the zone of legal representation, because I think entertainment lawyers, we're much more than just entertainment lawyers. We're counselors, we're therapists, we're ethics people, we're, you know, we counsel on so many things. We use our own life experiences to talk about feelings, to comfort our artists when they're high and when they're low, right? Because a lot of artists have mental health issues as well. And so I think you have to be able to have those conversations with your client, even when they're uncomfortable, because we do have to be sensitive to those issues. And in particular, for me, I saw this in the last couple of months where you felt like there was a little bit of drumming up of the black and brown issues. Yeah. And for me, it was like, oh gosh, am I going to be back in high school where this was, there were these fights in my high school, and it was like, and it did make me feel nervous.
That's a subsidiary of racism, though. It's just a subsidiary, just another part of it. Yeah.
And I just
people get pitted against each other.
Yeah. And it's like, having conversations even within our own cultures about how, and it's drummed up by people who are outside of our cultures. So it is like, it's important to have real honest conversations, to be sensitive about art, but also to be sensitive about culture. And I don't think you get that if you don't have diversity in a firm. I think if you're just answering a black and white question, okay, you can do that. But it's more, representation is more than just, these four corners.
Yes. John, you don't want to weigh in on that? John's like, no, I'm not going to get in that one.
No, John's looking at the time and thinking we have to answer questions. That's why.
Yeah, that's fine. It's okay, John.
The questions on our list. So I want to start poking through these a little bit. I am going to bounce around because it looks like some of these are commentary, but I'm gonna get through as many of these as we can. I'm going to start with this question. How do you make those in power understand and care about diversity?
I'm going to go with Kevin's answer, money, right? So focus on what the cost is. What is the value proposition, right? What are you gaining when you have diversity? And it's all those studies that we're seeing, all those instances of you have increased creativity, you have better ability to make money, right? There's studies out there about boards that have at least one woman, or those companies make 10% more, or whatever the facts are there. So I think that's a good place to start. And then just like, do people like your brand as a result of it? Or do people like your company or your firm? Or what is the reputational value that comes aside from money? Those are the things I think that matter.
I think younger clients care about this. They care about diversity, and they're going to be more overtly requiring firms to look like them. And that goes to your point, Tope, and to your point, Kevin, that it results in money. If you want that client and they care about those issues, you're not going to get that client. You're not going to get that client if you don't look like them, if your team doesn't look like them. And I do think and look, if coming out of law school, could I have walked into any firm and said, I am requiring you to have this many diverse, attorneys at your firm? No, it took a lot of years in doing what I do and working and showing up to my firm and saying, I'd like for our clientele to look like this, and I'd like to do this, and then believing in me to do it. And there is a little bit of, specialness to that. But what if other firms did that too? I always tell myself that my hope is that I'm not sitting on an island by myself as one of the only Latina partners at a mid-sized firm, entertainment firm. I hope that there's a ton, and I hope that I'm last on the list of people who you call for a panel. That's the desire, but I'm not at every firm. So I'd like, for firms to really commit to helping people of color that they have hired, to retain them and to put them on the partner track, and to explain to them what they need, and to provide support, and to provide mental health support, and to provide a mentorship, to provide a space where they can speak about feeling that imposter syndrome without feeling judged, without feeling fear of being, retaliated or thought of as not intelligent. We need those, and need to find places that are welcoming in that way.
I agree 100%. And so, I'm here at a law school in Los Angeles, one of the most diverse cities in the world. And, when I speak to the faculty about this, I say, look, this issue of diversity isn't some side issue. It's not some side pet project. It's an existential issue. And it goes back to the number that John showed at the beginning. You saw that 42% number. That number is getting bigger and bigger by the year. And, the white population is at zero growth, has been for decades now. And by the way, Black people aren't too far off. We also are a dwindling race. But so, it's just, it makes sense. And so now how do we get past this? And how do we get to a point where in the city of Los Angeles, when I scroll through all these different law firms, and particularly the entertainment law firms, I don't see any Black people in these law firms, right? And going back to what Tope says, maybe we do have to start at middle school and high school, but we have to be committed to do that. And I will work with you, right? I will hand in hand work with people who want to do this, right? And I think there's a lot of us who will, if we have the vision. And I want to see the copyright office also really look at what equality looks like in this space. And they've made strides. They had a conference about this. They didn't invite me. I understand that, right? Somebody's got to take the fall, right?
Love that.
I would
turn
just
this
add one
session-
more thing, John. I think on a more basic level to answer that person's question, if you're looking at a peer organization and you see that they're doing something, that also can be motivating to people in power. Is sometimes it's about what are the people who look like us doing. So you're benchmarking from an industry perspective. So maybe you're not going to say, we would make more money if you made it a diverse team, but you can say, this company that we say is our peer, or this firm that we say is our peer, is doing XYZ thing. I think we should aim to do the same or better. And so that from a practical, like real life, what can you do standpoint, that can sometimes be valuable.
Thank you. Next question. Do you find that clients seek white male attorneys in your firm? And if so, how do you deal with that?
That's for you, Marjorie.
Yeah. You know,
Mhm.
it's funny. I have experienced that where I have had an experience where a client, and I won't say who it is, did eventually leave. And, you know, for those types of reasons. And I couldn't understand it because, you know, for obvious, I think I'm a pretty good lawyer. And I don't personally compete with my partners at my firm because they don't speak Spanish. Some of them do. Some of them speak a little bit of Spanish. But luckily, I'm in the lane.
You got a monopoly.
I'm a monopoly, exactly. And they allow me to be a monopoly. They like it. You know, I have a lane that I created for myself, where, you know, no, but I will say, you know, and I've been in that lane for the last, I'm not gonna say how long I've been, probably 17 years. And then at least in the last 10 years that I've been at the firm, almost 10 years, it's been my lane. And I do see a lot more white male lawyers coming into my lane. And look, you know, I still think that the advantages that I have and the advantages that firms should focus on when they're hiring is, what language do you speak? How do you interact with clients? Can you interact with clients who have no money, some money, that grew up here in the US, did not grow up in the US? And I think your world gets a lot broader if you include people who can communicate with all types of people. And even like I had this experience last week where one of my younger attorneys asked me something about a Korean client, and I don't work with Korean clients, but something about what she said. I said, well, I think it's very similar to what happens in Argentina, because my world, my Spanish speaking world, is not limited to the US. I work with clients in Argentina. I work with clients in Spain, Mexico, Colombia. I work internationally.
Take me with you.
I wish they would invite me to all these places. But you know, I have that worldwide experience because I don't just limit myself to one language and one country. You know, so I do think, again, it's like that, those sort of advantages, if you think beyond the scope of one particular person, you know, as a client, I think you are much more advantaged to look for someone like that. And as a firm, you are much more advantaged.
Yeah. I'm going to turn to this next question. Are law firms seeking non-lawyer professions that aren't necessarily lawyers, but are still essential professions for the firm? And in their hiring practice, are they seeking for diversity in those roles as well?
Hi, BJ.
I think so.
You know what? That is a great question. I work as an expert. So attorneys, when they have difficult problems in copyright, trademark, et cetera, they bring me on their cases, right? Either as a testifying expert or as a consulting expert. And I don't think, to that question, I don't think any thought has been given to that, or at least as far as I can tell. I would think that on litigation teams, that that having an expert like BJ, who's a terrific expert, by the way, in the fiduciary area, on the team would be considered part of the project, right? Of having a diverse team. But I've seen nothing on that. I've seen no literature on that. And I am the only African-American IP expert also that I know. Isn't that sad?
It's crazy.
I don't know if I've seen any research on that particular issue as well when I was preparing for this. I'm going to throw this question in, which is more geared towards entertainment. Do the panelists have any advice for young attorneys who are seeking to break into the entertainment industry? Now, there's a little bit off of bias, but this is an entertainment panel, and so the question is always Sorry?
I said objection.
Networking, continuing to especially now things are starting to open up. I realize I feel so terrible for all those people who graduated during the pandemic, because I think that they were very disadvantaged to not have those spaces to go to. Network your butt off. Go and meet tons of people. You'd be so surprised at people's willingness to go and have lunch or have a coffee with you. They'll buy it. If you're hungry, they'll pay for your lunch. You'd be very surprised, but you have to build your network, because I have those experiences constantly where somebody says, I'm looking for XYZ. And I think back at all the people that I've recently met with, and I say, oh, that person's looking for that job. Okay, let me connect you. So you have to build those relationships with industry folk. And you have to just get your resume out there. I sent resume, including the firm that I'm at right now. I faxed, if anybody knows what that is, I faxed my resume to my current firm, and I did not hear back from them. So they'll hear about that now. But I probably to 100 different firms, 0 answers, and here I am, many, many years later at that very firm. So it really is persistence. It is getting your network up, making sure you're asking people to keep you in mind, getting your resume up, clean up your resumes, because I've seen some terrible resumes. Clean up your resume, have somebody look at it. Ask the lawyer to look at it and see if they can give you any suggestions. And do those internships. Get in where you can. Get in and diversify. Get into a publishing company. Maybe one summer there, a couple, some weeks in a management firm. We look for that. We look for that experience. If you don't have it at a firm, we look at where you've been, and if you understand the language of entertainment. We don't want to teach you what a mechanical license is. We want you to know when you show up. We want you to read books. We want you to read Donald Passman's book. You gotta get yourself educated so you can get in there and just talk like a lawyer.
Yeah, I second that. I think the networking is a big piece, and it can come in different ways, right? So it's meeting people, yes, of course, in person. It's sending targeted questions and seeing if that opens up a dialogue. It's hearing someone speak on a panel and then connecting with them on LinkedIn and focusing in on something specific or expressing what it is. I think those are the pieces that help people ask for follow-up conversations and everything else. And I agree with Marjorie in that most of the time someone is willing to give you time. I can think over my career, only once did someone not respond to an email I sent that was that kind of like, hey, here's who I want to be when I grow up, like that kind of email. For the most part, people respond. And now I even see that it might take some time before I respond to someone, but I do respond when people reach out, because I'm like, that's how it happened for me. It was someone I knew who met someone else I knew who had talked about something I said I was interested in. And then boom, you find that you're connecting with someone and then landing in a place you want to be.
Yeah. That's all great advice. So I have a checklist for students, and I can pretty much tell who will make it and who won't based on my checklist. One is, of course, you got to take the classes. I mean, we're offering entertainment law, we're offering copyright law, we're offering entertainment contract drafting. I can't tell you how many third years have come to me when they're about to go out the door and they say, you know what, I think I want to do entertainment law. Like, have you taken any of these classes? They're like, no. Number two, networking, as Marjorie and Tope said, you got to network like crazy because it's a business of relationships, right? And a lot of times in these companies, they already know who they want to hire. So you have to put yourself in that position. The other thing, though, and this is thinking outside the box, publish something. In law school, most students can have an opportunity to publish a paper. Sitting in front of Marjorie or Tope with your paper about the new copyright, small claims court or whatever is going to go a long way in their eyes, right? That you're a committed person in this business. And then, of course, thinking outside the box. Hey, how about thinking about ways that you can bring in clients? It's not too early by the time you're in your second or third year of law school. If you can show you can bring in clients, I think Marjorie's firm is going to hire you. They highly value that, maybe more than legal skills from what I can see in some areas, right? For some lawyers anyway. So those are all things that you can do to really make yourself stand out. But I have graduates at Netflix, at Warner Brothers, at Telepictures. I can go on the list. And the one thing about them that all stood out is they were killer committed to this. And so the competition isn't as fierce as you think, because there's 5,000 people who say, I want to be an entertainment or entertainment lawyer. But how many of those people are going to stick it out the way Marjorie did and the way Tope did, right? And do whatever it takes. So it's a much smaller set of competition than what you think, actually.
That's true.
I'm gonna throw one final question out there. Do any of you have suggestions for raising individuals' awareness of implicit bias and any tools to help change those biases?
Well, my book, when it comes out, is called The Copyright House of Horrors. I think will help people. But I think, I think with Mr. Musk, for example, I just wish he would read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. So if you're from outside our community and you want to understand more about our community, that's a 1950s era book. But that book is basically a roadmap of racial relationships in the United States, and it'll help you understand a lot just by reading it. So that'd be my suggestion. Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison.
I think understanding the commonality that we all have bias and get comfortable with that is a place to start. In some of the trainings that I facilitate, I ask the question, who in this room is biased? And people are looking around like, am I really supposed to admit this? And I raise my hand and then they start to be like, oh, okay, me too, I guess,
Me,
so just getting everyone comfortable with that and knowing that it doesn't inherently, bias is not a bad thing. It's what keeps us safe. I see red, I stop, I think hot, I think danger, right? Like that's how my brain works to make sure that I don't get hurt. So it's just about when you start to make discriminatory judgments or actions that are negative, that's when it becomes an issue. So using that common language and accepting that we all have bias, I think is a starting point so people don't feel like they're being attacked when you start talking about bias.
Yeah, and do a little personal audit. Are you doing things, and it does come with getting over the uncomfortableness of realizing that you are inherently, that you have some biases in you, but also just sort of auditing those things and realizing your behaviors and making an effort to change those behaviors and say to yourself, what do I need to do to not, keep doing the things that I've been doing. That's a good thing. And then I think people, and taking, I do think it's important to do the research, and a simple Google can help you find all the tools that are available by the ABA. But I think it's more than that. And I think it is sort of accepting that all of us have the capability of being biased. It's just more about what are we willing to do to get past it and create a better and safe place for people to work.
I think on a personal level, I've been, as my role and as the chair of the entertainment law section, I've taken it upon myself to put this panel together just to have the discussion, right? Just to get people talking about what bias really is, and having people understand where and when it shows up, just so that they realize that, hey, maybe there is, something that I need to check within myself. or maybe there's certain practices going on within my company or my firm that I'm hearing us talk about that might need to change. You know, I think as a society we have been progressing towards, you know, towards diversity and equity and inclusion. But you know, as the slides that were presented at the beginning have shown, there's still a lot more room to grow. And so, at least for me, one of the tools that I'm trying to create are more panels like this, to have, you know, wonderful panelists like the three of you, and just have this conversation, just continue having it, just keep having, you know, more opportunities for people to say, to hear what, you know, what it's like for people who are minorities, to talk about their experience and just say, okay, this is what this person had gone through, and you know, do I recognize that? Do I now see that? Because so much more people are talking about it. You know, I think that's, you know, that's at least a tool that I'm trying to help spearhead within our industry and within this bar. And you know, I know that others are doing it as well, and that, you know, I hope those efforts continue, and I hope that, you know, we get closer to this equilibrium of 42.7% of minorities reaching, you know, the top level executives within our own industry. So with that said, you know, we've run out of time, but I want to thank each of you for spending the hour and a half to speak on this very important issue. I want to thank everyone who's joined in and listened. Again, the written materials should have the PowerPoint and the wonderful article that Kevin had prepared, which we will be doing a entirely separate CLE on, I think, towards the spring of next year, which you'll see more about that later on. But once again, thank you all.
Thank you, John, for putting this together and leading it. Let's give him a hand.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, we wish you all, you know, the best the rest of your day, and we hope to keep having this conversation within our industry and amongst our communities, so that we can continue to raise awareness. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.